Ahoy, this is Zdenka. Let's not waste any time. Let's talk about camera settings for filming in 24, 30, 60 and 120 frames per second, how to import them to 24 frames per second timeline, mix them together and slow them down in post. Many visual examples today. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Zdenka Darula. I create photo and video tutorials, tech reviews and creative camera challenges. If that's something you're interested in, you might consider hitting the subscribe button. Let's talk about cameras. Today I will be using two, Canon M50, which is filming right now, and Canon M6 Mark II. Those two cameras are quite the same. They're almost the same, except this one, M6 Mark II, doesn't shoot at 24 frames per second. And this gave me the idea to create today's video because I've done a lot of testing last week. Many of us here on YouTube film at 24 frames per second because it looks the most movie-like, and obviously my timeline is also 24 frames per second. When you grab Canon M50 and shoot at 24 frames per second, your settings will be, you want to double your shutter speed for the most natural look, so it is 1/50th of a second. I usually film a lot outdoors, so my ISO is 100 because it is bright and it's very sunny. My aperture is usually the lowest I can get, so it's f3.5, which I can get on this kit lens 15 to 45 millimeters. But for that, you need an ND filter which will block the excessive sunlight. I want the f3.5 because I want myself sharp and I want the background blurry. I want the beautiful bokeh. Let's talk about filming at 24 frames per second. If you are planning on doing the panning shots from left to the right, or right to the left, or up and down, the general rule is the less frame rates a second, in this case it's 24, it's not 120, but it's 24, which is less, the slower you want to pan to get a nice, slow, steady shot without seeing any jitter. Let's throw 24 frames per second slow panning shot and 24 frames per second fast panning shot. Slower panning looks smoother. I sometimes tend to rush as well, but it is important to keep in mind that the slower the better when you are filming in 24 frames per second. Let's move up and talk about 30 frames per second. If you're filming at 30 frames per second and putting it on the 30 frames per second timeline, all is good. But if you're filming at 30 frames per second and mixing it, putting it on a 24 frames per second timeline, it's not a very good idea. But first, let's talk about settings. So you're filming at 30 frames per second, shutter speed has to double, which is 1/60th of a second. ISO is the same. If I'm shooting outdoors, it's 100. And I'm still keeping the aperture low, which is 3.5, because I want the bokeh, blurry background, and obviously I'm still using ND filter to block the sunlight. And when it comes to panning, you still want to do very slow panning because, again, it is a lower number of frames per second, which is 30. Let's throw 30 frames per second on 24 frames per second timeline and let's see what happens. You will get jitter. Because frame rate 30 divided by 24 doesn't give you equal number, it is 1.25. So that means that 1.25 frame has to be dropped somewhere in that second. Now what you can do, you can slow it down to 80%, simply right click, change it to 80%, and you will see much smoother footage. It will have that little bit dreamy, slowed down look. Now the problem here is that I have a camera, Canon M6 Mark II, which doesn't shoot at 24 frames per second. If I do need just a B-roll where I don't need a voice, then it's okay. I can just slow it down to 80% and I can still use it. It's going to be a little bit dreamy. But if I need a voice with it, I am in trouble. It's just not going to work and make you totally laugh. Let's shoot 30 frames per second and actually slow it to 80%. How do you like my voice now?
So how do you like this voice? A little bit sexy, right? Well, believe it or not, it's me. Halloween is coming up. Halloween is coming up. How do you like this sound? Huh?
Don't worry, I had a good laugh over this too. So what I did, I switched to PAL to sort of go around it. So here I get 25 frames per second, which is the closest I can get. I shoot the footage in PAL at 25, then before I put it on 24 frames per second timeline, I interpret the footage to 23.976, press OK, and then add it to timeline. I did that in my past video where I needed just few clips from this camera as I was talking about Canon M50. Moving up to 60 frames per second, and let's talk about camera settings. Now, since you're filming at 60 frames per second, you need to double your shutter speed, and it's 1/125th of a second. If I'm shooting outdoors, ISO is the same, it's 100. Aperture, if I want a lot of bokeh, is the same, f3.5, but I need to ease up a little bit on the ND filter because I need to let more light in this time. If you are shooting in low light conditions and you want to shoot slow motion, you will introduce more grain to the camera because the shutter speed is much faster, you're letting less light into your camera. So it's something to keep in mind. If you're planning on shooting slow motion in low light, it is the best to get a lot of light. You will need a lot of light. Let's talk about panning. Now you can pan a little bit faster. We are not shooting 24, 30 frames per second, we are shooting 60, so it's higher number, and therefore you can pan a little bit faster to get smooth shot. Let's throw footage shot at 60 frames per second on 24 frames per second timeline, and let's see what happens. It's a bit jittery because if you divide 60 by 24, it is not a whole number. 60 divided by 24 is 2.5. That means that 2.5 frames has to be dropped somewhere in that 1 second. What you can do, you can slow it down to 80% or 40%. 60 times 0.4 gives you 24. 24 divided by 24 is 1, which is whole number. Let's look at both examples. First, let's slow it down to 80%. Just add to timeline, right click, slow down at 80%. Second one, which looks nicer and is more slower and actually ideal as 24 divided by 60 is 0.4, which is 40%. So let's slow it down to 40%. Again, add it to timeline, right click, and slow down to 40%. And here is the result. Last, we need to talk about 120 frames per second, the battery slow motion everybody likes so much. Camera settings first. You need to double the shutter speed because you are shooting at 120 frames per second, so it's 1/250th of a second. If I'm shooting outdoors, the ISO is the same. Since I like the bokeh, I keep the aperture same, 3.5, but I need to ease up more on the ND filter because I need to add more light in to the camera's sensor. So again, if you are shooting super slow motion in very low light conditions, you will get a lot of grain. It's not a very good idea. You need a lot more light to get in to your camera, something to keep in mind. And because it is much higher frame rate, 120 frames per second, when it comes to panning, you can pan much faster. It's not a problem there. You will get a very smooth footage. Let's throw 120 frames per second footage on 24 frames per second timeline and see what happens. There is no jitter because 120 divided by 24 is 5, which is a whole number. Now you can slow down the footage up to 20%. How do we know? 24 divided by 120 is 0.2, which is 20%. So last time, let's right click and change the speed to 20%. Well, I hope you like this visually detailed video today. You can always bookmark it, keep it as a reference, and always come back to it in the future. If you did, please give it thumbs up and subscribe to all future videos. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching or helping support this channel for only $2 a month, you will get access to new LUT and Lightroom presets, which I will post on my Patreon page. All the information is in a video description below. There's a link. Also, if you have any questions or comments or simply want to say hello, you can do so in a comment section below. I always read it all and I will try to respond. And I will see you all my friends in the next video. Ciao, ahoj.